Channels Television's in-house data analyst Jide Ogunsowo joins me on the news at 10 to discuss OPEC's oil output cut. I want to thank you so much. Now, earlier this week, we saw the figures on what OPEC, the cartel, announced. It cuts oil production to about 1 million barrels per day. Will this move achieve the goal of raising the price of oil as predicted by energy watchers?
It depends on how you look at it, Gimba. But this moment reminds me of what had happened 3 decades ago. Professor Tam David West had a similar problem with OPEC. And then there was a war. It was a war in the boardroom of OPEC. It was a war between those on one hand that wanted a price cut and those on the second hand that wanted a volume cut. Now, at the end of this very bloody war, those that wanted a volume cut won. Now, that's October 1984. But then, 2 months down the line, some other thing had happened, and Professor Tam David West had been called to intervene. And that was after there was an agreement in October by OPEC members to go for the volume cut. A lot of these members were accused not to honor that volume cut. So here's how it connects with what is happening today. So OPEC's current aggregated volume output is 33.6 million barrels per day. Now, they plan to cut it by approximately 4%, down to 32.5 million barrels per day. So the challenge is, we've seen a history of OPEC agreeing to volume cuts, but not implementing that volume cut. But if indeed, nevertheless, OPEC does stick, and its members stick to this volume cut, then we should be able to see oil price of $50 and heading upwards of $50. Now, the second part of it is there's the Russia involvement in all of this as well. Now, Russia is expected as well to cut oil production by 300,000 barrels. Now, we also know Russia has a history of not achieving and not implementing its own side of the bargain. But if Russia assumes its own side of the bargain and reduces oil production by as much as 300,000 barrels, then we are in for looking towards seeing oil prices go upwards of $60. But all this is the short and medium term perspective. What will happen in the medium to long term? Now, Gimba, there's no guarantee of where oil will be in the medium to long term. And there are 3 reasons why there's no guarantees. The first is shale oil. Now, that's really happening in North America. Shale oil makes the medium to long-term projections for oil price to be uncertain. The second reason is we have a huge global storage of oil in excess of 2 billion barrels. Now, that's the second reason why it makes the medium to long-term forecast for oil prices uncertain. Now, the third reason is to look at non-fossil fuels, and I'm talking about solar energy and electrical energy. Now, if you put these 3 factors together in the medium to long-term perspectives, we are not certain of what the oil prices will look like. But in the short to medium term, if OPEC members do honor their commitment to that 1.2 million barrel cut, and if Russia as well honors its commitment to a 300,000 barrel cut, we most likely might see oil hovering between that $50 to $60 band per barrel.
I must ask you this question, just hearing what you're just telling us now. Will a higher oil price be in favor of Nigeria or not?
It depends on what perspective. And it reminds me of a story of two twin brothers. And I'll quickly share that with you. Twin brothers had an alcoholic dad. And they saw every day they lived with an alcoholic dad. Now, 15 years down the line, one of these boys was caught in a bar, dead drunk. And they asked him that what had happened. And his main reason was, he said, his dad. Now, they asked his second brother, who wasn't an alcoholic, who was now a successful public speaker, what had happened. And he also pointed to his dad. So clearly it depends on what perspective you want to learn from. Now, how does it connect with what is all happening with regard to oil prices? What it means is, how do we want to use this information and what strategy do we want to adopt? Now, clearly with these oil prices, we've seen stocks of some certain airlines drop because it is expected that oil prices will impact aviation fuel and lead to higher operating costs for low-cost carriers. So we've seen stocks of some certain international airlines, Ryanair, EasyJet, we've seen those stocks tumble. At the same time, we've seen equities and we've seen prices in oil-producing firms, shale oil producers, Shell as well, we've seen their own share prices increase because of the expectation that they would earn more.
But what would be the direct impact, looking at Nigeria, for example, and the governors actually need this higher prices to be able to pay salaries, for example, and carry out other projects?
Yes, you're right. The first impact is if oil prices continue in the upward trend, then petrol costs for instance, is likely not to be what it is this time next year. So there's also an impact on local fuel costs. But for the governors, the interesting thing about the governors is for us to look at those states that have a lot of stakes with oil assets. And those are the 8 states that are collecting the 13% derivation, Ondo, Abia, and the 5 other states in the south. Now, the interesting thing is all these states, within January to October this year, their funds that they've collected from derivation, 187 billion naira. So on that impact, yes, we'll likely see those oil states collecting more money in terms of their derivation if oil prices go up. But indeed, all other states as well will get some benefits from a higher oil price. Now, the interesting thing is, even though we see those 8 oil producing states getting 187 billion naira January to October, that's just the economic side. The second way to look at it is the political side. 6 out of these 8 states are PDP-controlled states. So in simple terms, if you work out the numbers, out of the 187 billion naira that these 8 oil-producing states have collected for derivation, 182 billion naira out of that, that's approximately 97% of all monies that go into that derivation states are going into PDP states. So in simple terms, what it means is, even though the government wants higher oil revenue for the economy, the political implications is the opposition party will be funding, or rather the government in power right now will be funding the opposition.
Always a delight having to hear your analysis. Jide Ogunsowa, in-house analyst. Many thanks indeed.